Hello, everyone. How is everyone doing? Welcome to our Thursday wine meditation. I'm delighted to be here again. We've got some really fun wines today. And I'm going to start with our Sauvignon Blanc. Let's talk about Sauvignon Blanc. So we're going to be tasting the 2019 Sauvignon Blanc today. So Sauvignon Blanc has had a long history at Chimney Rock. We have made Sauvignon Blanc since the 90s here. And we used to, I don't know if we have some older fans here, we used to make a Fumé Blanc. It was basically the same wine we make, but it was just called Fumé Blanc. Fumé Blanc was a sort of a marketing term that came from Robert Mondavi. So back in the 50s and 60s, Sauvignon Blanc had gotten kind of this bad reputation in Napa, that it was kind of a sweet, cheap wine, and Mondavi really wanted to elevate the perception of the grape. And so he thought, well, what better way than to kind of Frenchify the name? And so he did a little pun on, so Fumé kind of stands for the what's the term? Kind of the flintiness of Sauvignon Blanc, and he called it Fumé Blanc. And he succeeded in elevating the perception of Sauvignon Blanc, and they used that term, as did a few other wineries, and we were one of the ones that used the term Fumé for many years, until, I think our public now really understands what Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc is about, that it is a serious white. And so we started calling it Sauvignon Blanc by the grape again in 2000, and I want to say 2010. Yeah, so our vineyard, where we grow our Sauvignon Blanc, is one of the few vineyards that we have, or the only vineyard that we have, that's not here in Stag's Leap. So we planted our vineyard up in Rutherford-on-Mee Lane for Sauvignon Blanc, for Sauvignon Gris, and for our Élevage Blanc project. And we haven't made Sauvignon Blanc in a few years, but we just launched our very first one in 2019, I think it's the first one since 2015. So a lot of people don't even know we make Sauvignon Blanc. We make very small amounts of this wine. This one, I believe we just made around 400 cases, and it was just released this summer. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I make it and what my goal is in making this wine. We'll talk a little bit about food pairings and taste as well. First, I'm going to raise a glass to you all and just thank you for joining me through all of these live tastings. Oh, this is so fun, such a fun wine. So we make our Élevage Blanc, which you're all familiar with, which is barrel fermented. So it has a little bit of oak. It's a white wine that's really meant to age. This is very different. This is a wine where I'm really trying to capture kind of the purity of the fruit and the essence of Sauvignon Blanc fruit, the fruitiness of it, that dimension of the grape. And so we hand harvest these grapes at night. They come in nice and fresh, and at the time when the acidity is at its peak. And typically we whole cluster press these grapes. So we take the whole clusters, we put them in a big press, and we squeeze very gently. The juice then flows to a tank, and we ferment this in tank. So why tank? Why not barrel? Well, in tank, I can control temperature. And so this is a wine that I ferment somewhere between 45 and 50 degrees. That really allows the esters to be retained. If you want to make aromatic whites, keeping the temperature cool is really important. So I ferment it super, super slowly. It takes almost over a month to finish. And this does not go through malolactic fermentation, so it's really a little bit leaner, perhaps, than Élevage Blanc in style. But I do a little trick to give it a little bit of mouthfeel. So at the end of fermentation, we barrel down into stainless barrels a small portion of the tank. and I keep it with the lees, which is kind of the yeast sediment at the bottom of the barrel. And we steal a technique from Burgundy. We stir those lees into the juice to give it a little bit of richness. So it's a little bit unusual. Sauvignon Blanc can be very sort of lean and austere, a lot of acid. But we like our wines with a little bit of mouthfeel and richness, and so we wanted to add that element to it. So let's taste this wine. That's what I've been waiting for. So I definitely like sort of a riper style of Sauvignon Blanc. I love, if you pick it a little sooner, you can get aromas like a little bit of grassiness, a little bit of boxwood, maybe, if you think about the style of whites that you get from New Zealand, the acid's quite sharp, cooler region, so it's different. We pick it a little bit later, and so we're getting more aromas like peach, white nectarine, a little bit of citrus and pear, but a lot of stone fruit, which I really love. It's just like a bowl of fresh peaches in the summer. It's so good. And you can really see purity of fruit, right? There's no oak effect. It's just very lively in the glass. And we're going to go to taste this. And nice bright acidity, but it has definitely a little bit of richness. It makes me want oysters immediately. I wish I had oysters right now. But I really think this lends itself to sort of classic white wine pairing. I think this is great with something like sushi or oysters or scallops, just something that's really fresh and lively that acidity really complements. I bet we've got some fans who never knew we made this wine, so I hope you're enjoying this. I'll try to get my feed going again, just so I can see. Hello, everyone. Okay. All right. So, any questions about Sauvignon Blanc? Do we have any before?
I don't have any questions directly about SB yet, but we've had several comments on the room that you're in.
So we like to change it up every week, and so we left our barrel room, and today I'm in one of our private tasting salons at Chimney Rock, which is not currently being used because we're only doing outdoor tastings right now. But this is known as the collector's room, and behind me is a wall of wine to kind of demonstrate all of our different single vineyards. So a bunch of different ones. I'll tell you a little secret. These are empty, however, because with the lighting behind it, it's not ideal storage for wine. So we wouldn't store wine in front of lights, but it's very romantic anyway. We love this room. So that's where I am today. And vineyards right in front of us. It's a beautiful, sunny, very hot day here in Napa Valley. We are in the 90s today. And so this has been an interesting week. We're experiencing our first little heat spike of the season. And as always, we're prepared for Mother Nature to throw us some curveballs. We're expecting 100-degree weather this weekend. So I'm going to actually, before I go to Tomahawk, let me tell you a little bit about what's going on with harvest, because it's pretty exciting. I actually just sampled the grapes for this block this morning. So the Sauvignon Blanc and the Sauvignon Gris are probably about 2 weeks from being harvested. So we're getting very close. A lot of adrenaline with my team. We're getting excited for harvest. We're really, I think in a year like this, we're really welcoming the delight of making wine and being able to be absorbed and maybe forgetting the outside world a little bit. So we're really excited. So let me tell you a little bit about this growing season up until now. You guys have heard me use the term the lazy winemaker's vintage. It is a lazy winemaker's vintage so far. Mother Nature's been very good. We had sort of a lower than average rainfall year, and then a very dry, warm spring. We thought it was going to be a really early vintage, and then we had this kind of cool down in July. And we've had these beautiful foggy mornings in July, and it takes a while before the sun comes out. So that kind of slowed things down a little bit. And now we're having our first little heat. So that'll kind of make things move along. Actually, things don't, when you get to 100 degrees, the grapevines kind of go on lockdown. They do what we do. They go inside and they stay cool. So they kind of stop doing things, and we kind of let them go through it. We water as needed to keep the canopies healthy, and then we sort of wait. So it's a moment that requires extreme patience and fortitude. So that's where we're at. We tasted the Sauvignon Gris today. It was at 22 bricks. So it's almost there. Literally, I think a couple of weeks, and we'll be bringing that fruit in. So very exciting. And we will be making a 2020 Sauvignon Blanc as well. So we're thrilled to be doing that. With that, let's move on to, I'm going to move on to Tomahawk. And again, I think we can leave questions for the end, and I'll sort of focus on tasting. So we're going to taste another one of my favorite vintages. And this is a favorite vintage to me, not because it was like critically acclaimed or because, you know, the usual stuff. This was a very hardworking vintage. So 2011, I'm going to take you back, stark contrast to this year. We had a very wet, cold year from winter all the way through August. I mean, it literally was one of the coldest years I've seen in my 23 years of making wine. And so 11 required a lot of thinking on our feet, responding to climate, thinking ahead. So one of the things that we did in 11, I'll tell you a story. I was sort of walking the vineyards in, I would say early, maybe late August, maybe like close to around this time, and tasting, kind of looking at the Cabernet and really going, oh my goodness, how is this going to ripen? You know, calling friends, how are we going to get there? It's so cold, doesn't look like it's going to warm up. And so we made a decision in the vineyards to pull leaves right around the fruit zone very aggressively. So we literally, if you came to see our grapes that year after the end of August, it was wide open, just grapes, no leaves right around the grapes except for above. And we really wanted to get as much sun exposure as we could, because we were concerned if we didn't do that, we wouldn't get to full ripeness. And I can look back at one of the best decisions I've ever made in winemaking, and it really paid off, because we got some rain during the season while the grapes are on the vine, and having that airflow was really critical that year. And we really were able to eliminate more of the herbal characters that happen unless you get direct sunlight. So that we needed all the direct sunlight that we could. So we are going to taste 2011 Tomahawk. And what I'd like to say about 11, my nickname for the vintage, is that this is what Napa Valley fruit would do with Bordeaux weather. Bordeaux is much cooler than we are. That's why the wines are different in personality. They tend to be a little bit more austere, maybe higher acidity, a little bit leaner, but with a lot of tannin. And the 11s, I think, showcase that. They really show the personality of a cooler climate. And Tomahawk is 100% Cabernet, so it's really going to show that in a very focused way. So Tomahawk is one of our 9 single vineyards. It comes from the very south end of the estate. A reminder on how Tomahawk got its name. The Wapo Indians used to hunt in the hills above this vineyard, and we actually found some artifacts when the property was developed, some arrowheads, a couple of other things, and we thought it was important, karmically important, to name something in their honor. So we have an arrowhead vineyard and a Tomahawk vineyard. So low, and Tomahawk, just, it happens to be a good power name. And that's what this vineyard is. It's at one of the coolest sites on the property. So this is a cool site in a cool vintage, right? So cool square. And so you're really going to see the influence of the cool year, but also of the vineyard. So let's take a smell here. I love the aromatics on this wine. So this shows, this is not your typical like opulent, jammy Napa Cabernet at all. You're going to see layers here. So we're going to start, I see a little bit of mint. I smell a little mint and anise. Not bell pepper, but almost like a Serrano or a Padron, like a little bit of a hint of that. And cool year climate can give you almost like a floral character, like a violet character in Cabernet. And I get a little bit of that, almost like a dried flower component. And then we get to the fruit. So of course there's fruit here. And it's more in the cassis, kind of black currant, not so much blackberry, but more of a red tone fruit, a little bit of plumminess. And this is a wine that is now 9 years of age. So a lot of people ask me, what do you think is the ideal time to drink a Cabernet? And one of my favorite periods in a Cabernet's development is actually the 8 to 10 year mark, which this wine isn't exactly. And part of the reason for that is I think there's still the freshness of the fruit, but you're starting to get some of these more developed age characters they're just starting to peek through. So I get a little bit of a cigar box component. And almost, there's one of my favorite descriptors for Cabernet when it starts to show a little bit of age is wet stone. So imagine like summer, you've just had this pour down and you're smelling gravel. And I love that smell. And you see it in this wine today. Anyway, I could smell this like all day. It's so very interesting and rich and layered. I don't need to taste it. It's so beautiful to just smell. But we're going to taste it. So 9-year-old cab. Think of older cabs is starting to get more supple. But this still has quite a bit of backbone and tannin. And it really kind of shows, I think, a little bit of the austerity of the year. And I love it. I think it's so graceful. And this is Cabernet like the Cabernets that I first fell in love with. Because my love for wine started drinking Bordeaux, which is a cooler climate. And this really reminds me of kind of the wines from Bordeaux, because it just has a little bit of herbal and wet stone and mineral that's not as typical in Napa, but we got that in 11. And so I know you may have heard some bad things about 11, but I really believe it's a magnificent vintage because it tells a very different story than what you normally see. And somebody just was asking me on another virtual tasting I did today, and they were saying, can you pick your favorite vintage? And I always say absolutely not, because no set of growing conditions is ever duplicated, right? That's like the beautiful thing about Cabernet. This bottle will never be duplicated again. And that singular story. And then you get a vintage that's like 11, that's cooler, and it's really extraordinarily different. So I actually refer to 11 as one of my favorites, because it was, I think winemakers develop an attachment to vintages where you really had to work hard, right? And you really had to pull some muscle to make great wine under challenging conditions. And we are extremely proud of our 11s and what they've done and how they're showing now. So I think at the beginning, when the wines were first released, there's almost like there's an expectation that Napa's always fruity, it's always very lush and opulent, and there's almost like, wait, this isn't that, but it doesn't mean it's not beautiful. It's just different, and I think this and a piece of like great grilled beef right now, I could just die. I wish I had food, but alas, I don't. So I hope a lot of you guys got to try this bottle. If you didn't, and if you don't have any 11s in your cellar, get some. And that's always my word of advice. When you find a producer that's consistent in what they do, and when they have the ability to farm their grapes year to year, that's where you want to try vintages that have been designated challenging by maybe critics, because good producers will produce great wine every year. And I think this is an extraordinary bottle. I'm like kind of in love with it right now. So I can't wait to hear what you guys think. Let's see who's on. Nice and chewy. Oh, David Hamrick's got the 14. Yep. Hi, Sasha.
And then Kelly has the 2015. So those are the other two vintages that people are asking about.
Yeah, so 2015, diametrically opposed to 11, because that was one of the warmest years. So typically, just to give you an idea, the cadence of a normal harvest for Cabernet starts in early to mid-October, and we finish late October, early November. That's what I think of as an average vintage. In 15, we finished harvesting all of our Cabernet by September 29th. So it was one of the warmest years to date here. I love the 15s. There's a purity of fruit to the 15 that is just irreplaceable. It's so beautiful. I would imagine that 15 still has quite a bit of tannin, because it's a young wine, and in a drought year you're getting really tiny berries, lots of concentration. But the 15 is a beautiful, but very different. I think if you were to taste them side by side, you might go, those must be different wineries, they must be different regions. You might even think, well, this is France and that's Napa. So that's my take on the 11. Any other vintages we're interested in?
So it was just the 2014, the 2015, and then Dave is asking how much longer he should hold on to his 2007 Tomahawk.
2007, wow, I haven't had that in a while. So I had the 7 in the context of a vertical. We tasted the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I think, in a vertical. And the 6 was the first vintage of that wine. I would be super curious about how that 7's drinking right now. So that would be 13 years old, right? Is that right? Doing the math right? Yeah. So I might be tempted to hang on to that for another couple of years and hit it at 15. But Dave, I'll say what I tell everybody about, when to drink wine. I think remember what your preference is. So if you tend to like more of that freshness, of the fruitiness of a younger wine, you may want to drink it soon. If you really like those ethereal secondary aromas that start to rise, and Tomahawk, even though it's a big wine, over time will get softer. And so if you want to taste it in that sort of ethereal, magical time, like wait 15 to 20. So whatever patience you might have to age it, I would say you can exercise that.
And then a question back to the Sauvignon Blanc. Brian was just asking if you could just recap. So he says the only difference between the Fumé Blanc and the Sauv Blanc is the name. Is that what you said?
That's absolutely the only difference. It was just the name. It was always tank fermented. We never used oak. It was fermented very cold. The only thing that I started to do later, so back in the Fumé Blanc days, it was solely tank fermented, and then we didn't put a little bit in stainless barrels and stir. That's an Elizabeth trick. I started doing that probably after we made, Élevage Blanc, when I learned that you get a little bit of texture in there. So that's the only difference in kind of the style of the wine. It's maybe a little bit richer because we do some stirring in stainless barrels. So that's it.
Mm-hmm. And then we've got another person. Debbie's tasting the 2014 as well in Fair Oaks.
The 2014 Tomahawk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and 14 and 15, by the way, very similar. 13, 14, 15 was that sequence of drought years that we had here in Napa. So very similar. It's interesting though, 14 is a little bit more elegant. The tannins are a little bit more supple than 15 and 13. It's really interesting, and I can't really explain it. There's a part of me that thought that 13 was the first drought year, so the grapevines were just like, what is this? And so they just produced these massive wines. And 14, maybe they were a little acclimatized. And then by 15, they were kind of done with these hot years. And then fortunately 16 came along, it was a little bit more balanced. But 14 is lovely as well.
And speaking of kind of the trends, Tom is asking kind of what you said at the beginning, how the 2020 harvest for the reds specifically is coming along.
Yeah, so harvest for the reds in 2020 is looking really good as well. It's a much smaller crop than we had in 2018-19, and you kind of expect that. You know, grapevines sort of give and take. They tend to balance things out, and we've had 18 was a fairly large vintage. 19 a little bit smaller, and I believe 20 will be smaller yet. Quality looks really good. In a lot of vintages, we're fighting maybe vigor, but canopies are just perfect. The berry size is very small, so I think we're looking at very concentrated reds. And I mentioned we're having heat spike. Fortunately for reds, it's still early on. They literally just are finishing up turning color. And so skins are still fairly tough. And I think heat right now won't impact us as much as maybe a heat spike would in, say, late September or early October. So I'm sleeping well on the reds, a little bit more nervous on the whites, and we're watching them very closely because they're a little bit closer to ripeness. So, but the reds look good.
Good. And Todd is asking for the 2011 Tomahawk if it's in your personal collection, when would you open it? How long would you hold it?
So the 2011 is one of those wines that I've actually held back in my personal cellar. And usually I'm like too curious to do that. But I really wanted to see the aging chops on this one because I believe it's really long. So again, this is a 9-year-old cab. I will tell you, I recently, this year, tasted a bottle of the 1984 and 1985 Chimney Rock Cab. So how old is that? As old as we are, over 35 years. And so they still had beauty, they still had grace. So our wines really can age 20 to 25 to 30, and then you'll see subtle differences, I think, once you start to get above 25. Some vintages definitely survive better than others, and we see it now in some of those older wines. So the 84 and the 85 were extraordinary. 86 hasn't aged as gracefully. So the 11, I think, has potential for 25 easy, but I'm testing it out myself. So I'll let you know. So far, I think this is beautiful. I think it's very youthful still. It really tastes like a young wine at 9. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this evolves because I think it really has the character of a wine that's got long staying power.
David wants you to know that no one can wait that long.
Oh, no one can wait that long. You know what? I probably can't wait that long either. And my motto, Dave, is drink it as long as you can resist it. So that really is, life is short, especially with what we're all going through right now.
So as we wrap up, I thought it would be fun just to give a teaser of the wines that we're tasting the next time and why they're fun, why we I think we're leaning towards the unfiltered. So I think maybe just explain the unfiltered program.
Excuse me. Okay, so 2 weeks, another Thursday meditation. And I'm going to be doing something we haven't done before. We are going to taste two of our unfiltered wines. So they're single barrel bottlings that we made in 14, and they come from some of our best vineyards. And so if you haven't heard about them, you'll look for the email. They're pretty special wines. And I can't wait to taste with you guys. Sorry about this.
Yeah.
And with that, I'm going to raise a glass again, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, I've been doing a lot of talking today. Everything's good. We're healthy. No worries. I hope you have a great couple of weeks, and I look forward to catching up next Thursday. Cheers, guys.